It begins not with a scream, but with silence. The kind of silence that hangs in the air after bells stop ringing in a village square, when the market stalls are packed down, when the birds take note of what men have done, and even the wind seems unsure if it ought to disturb the stillness. In that hush, a single golden spear glinted in the dusk. No fanfare. No drums. Just the low hum of something ancient returning to life. Wallachia, cradle of hills and iron, of sheepdogs and skeletal churches where saints watched with soot-streaked eyes. A land not of fairy tales, but of endurance. People here didn't believe in happy endings. They believed in surviving winters, in patching boots with rawhide, and in keeping secrets buried just under the frost line. So, when whispers of the golden spear began swirling through hamlets and stone fortresses alike, no one scoffed. They just checked their gates twice, held their children closer, and made sure not to speak too loudly when the fires dimmed. We begin our story not in the glittering halls of princes but in the mud-choked lanes of Targovist, the old capital. Mid-15th century. An alley city? Wooden roofs leaned like drunkards, and gutter water carried the dreams of the poor out to the Argesh River. A woman named Eliana lived above a blacksmith's forge here. Her husband had died coughing coal, her son gone with the levy to fight in some skirmish over land that never fed them anyway. She boiled cabbage and goat bones, and she knew better than most the shape of grief. But when she heard the rumors, "He's returned," they whispered in the taverns, something else stirred in her. Not fear, no. Memory. Because Vlad had walked these streets once. A boy no older than her son, taken by the Turks, returned a stranger. His eyes were already too quiet, the way winter skies are quiet right before the storm. But he smiled when he did return, not with joy, never with joy, but with the grin of a man who had made a bargain with devils and intended to collect. You know his name. Or at least, the name they turned him into. Vlad Țepeș. The Impaler. The Dragon's son. The man who could command the Danube to bleed. But what they never tell you, what the chroniclers often soften with Latinized politeness, is that Vlad had favorites. Not in love, but in punishment. And his favorite wasn't fire or axe or rope. It was a spear. A golden one. Not many saw it. Fewer survived it. But all remembered what it did. In the year 1457, a Saxon merchant named Ulrich Neumann arrived in Wallachia, clutching his permit from the King of Hungary, hopeful he might set up shop in Targovist and earn silver enough to retire by the sea. He was clever, spoke 4 languages, and carried a small box of wax-sealed letters tied with red ribbon. He also had a habit of underestimating people, especially those who smelled of wood smoke and onion stew. He met Vlad 3 days after his arrival. Not in court, but in a courtyard behind the princely palace, where chickens scratched near slabs of forgotten masonry. Vlad was feeding the birds. Yes, feeding them, throwing crumbs from a crust of stale black bread. His robes were simple. His eyes anything but. "You are Neumann?" Vlad asked, without turning. "Yes, Your Grace." The merchant bowed. "I've come to sell wool at inflated prices. To preach Hungarian taxes in my city. To write letters home full of complaints about our smells and habits. And to do what all foreigners do here, forget we have ears." Neumann swallowed. "I meant no offense. You mean to live. That I understand. So do I." And with that, Vlad offered him a crust. It should have been a warning. Within a fortnight Ulrich was dead. Not because he committed treason. Not because he insulted the crown. But because he paid a guard to sneak a Saxon relic past inspection. A silver relic shaped like a cross, engraved with a double-headed eagle, symbol of the empire. Vlad found it under the merchant's floorboards, wrapped in velvet, blessed in some Austrian chapel. They found Ulrich 2 days later. Not on a stake, like the others, but above the gates. Skewered. Through. A single, golden spear, clean as an arrowhead. No mess. No smell. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, as if even death wasn't enough to justify a sound. The spear itself shimmered faintly, even at night, even in fog. The people called it Orierazbjörnar, the Golden Vengeance. But the spear's origin wasn't Saxon, nor Turkish, nor Byzantine. It was older. Perhaps Roman. Perhaps not. Some said it had been forged in the time of Dacian kings, by priests who spoke to wolves and bound metals with blood. Others claimed it had been stolen from the Vatican by Vlad's ancestors, handed down in a pack too dark to ink. One story, told only in hushed tones by candlelight, spoke of a cave hidden in the cliffs near Curtia de Argeș. A hunting party had stumbled into it generations ago. Inside, strange symbols, bones piled high like altars, and in the center, a spear buried in stone. They left it there. But not all forgot. When Vlad returned from the Ottoman courts, scarred in soul and hardened in mind, he rode straight to those cliffs. Alone. He returned a day later. With nothing in hand, but his horse walked strangely, nervous, as if the smell of something divine had burned into its skin. Months later, the first impalement was seen. It wasn't political. A thief. A common boy caught robbing a monastery cellar. Vlad ordered no trial. Just a message. And the message was delivered, one spear, straight through the gut, angled just so he lived for hours, screaming, spitting, praying, before silence took him and the birds began to arrive. But it was not the usual stake. No rough oak. No branch of pine. A smooth, gleaming spike. Golden. In the convent outside the city, a nun named Sister Magdalena tended to the sick. Her hands smelled of ash and lavender. She had seen worse things in life: burns, festering limbs, mothers weeping over blue-faced infants. But she could not forget the way the air changed the first time she saw the golden spear. It came with no warning. One moment she was trimming herbs in the garden, the next, bells ringing, frantic hoofbeats, a crowd forming near the north road. When she arrived, she thought the man atop the spear was a mannequin. That's how still he was. But then the wind shifted and a single drop of blood slipped down his thigh like a tear. She crossed herself and whispered, "Lord preserve us." But the Lord, it seemed, was no longer welcome in Wallachia. That night Sister Magdalena wrote in her private journal, "There is no need to build more gallows. The prince has found a quieter God to pray to." Historians will argue about the numbers. Was it hundreds? Thousands? They tallied the dead as if counting coins at a ledger. But Wallachians didn't measure in corpses. They measured in stories. In warnings. In the way a child's eyes darted toward the horizon when someone mentioned the prince. You see, the golden spear wasn't just a weapon. It was a ritual. A performance. They say Vlad cleaned it himself. Polished the tip with cloth soaked in vinegar and salt. Carried it in a velvet-lined trunk. Never let another soul touch it. Even his boyars, those trembling nobles who faked loyalty like jesters juggling hot irons, never dared ask where it was kept. And yet they all knew it could appear anywhere. In a castle hall. At a town gate. Outside a shepherd's hut. Wherever justice, or vengeance, demanded spectacle. Sometimes he spoke to it. Whispered. Some said he named it. But no one agreed on the name. Solomon's thorn. The Dacian's tooth. Angel's fang. Each name more mythical than the last. Each one meant to dress up horror in gold-leafed robes. But the people knew better. They called it Aurea Osanda. The Golden Damnation. One winter, a traveler from Krakow, a scholar, ink-stained and shivering, arrived in Targovist with parchment and a quill. He intended to chronicle Vlad's reign. He left with frostbitten fingers and night terrors. He wrote only one line in his diary before vanishing into the Carpathians. There are tyrants. There are madmen. And then there is he who impales not to kill, but to remember. And remember they did. Because in Wallachia, memory was survival. And the spear never rusted. The wind that howled across the peaks of the southern Carpathians wasn't the sort of wind that carried songs. It gnawed instead, through wool cloaks, through thatched roofs, through memory itself. By 1458, Wallachia was no longer a principality ruled by men, it had become a theater for dread. A procession of punishments, a kingdom stitched together by sharpened stakes and silence. And yet, beneath the blood and fear, daily life marched on, like a mule with blinders, forward, clumsy, tired, resigned. In a village called Glogova, nestled at the foot of a pine-choked slope, an old goatherd named Andrei lived with his granddaughter, a girl of 10 named Katrinel. Her father had died in one of Vlad's border campaigns. Her mother had wasted away quietly one spring, like frost melting from a window pane. Andrei taught her to walk in the woods without snapping twigs, how to skin a rabbit without weeping, and how to bury a secret so deep not even wolves could dig it up. He also taught her the names of stars: Orion, Cassiopeia, the watchman's crown, because even in a land of spears, the sky still offered order. Katrinel would sit by the fire at night, chin resting on her knees, as Andrei mumbled stories half-remembered from his grandfather's time. Of dragons who drank rivers, of monks who could vanish into fog. But one night, he told her about the golden spear. "It doesn't hurt," he said, staring at the flames. "Not at first." "How do you know?" she asked, eyes wide. "I saw it. Once. Many years ago. A boy. Just a boy. He'd stolen a loaf from a noble's cart. And the prince, he did it? No. That day, it was a woman." This caught Katrinel's breath. "A woman?" Andrei nodded slowly. "They say she wore red. A velvet dress too fine for Wallachia. Some thought she was a foreigner. Others said she came from Sibiu, once a noble, now something else. No one knew her name. Only that she rode with the prince's guard and carried a spear longer than a man is tall. Gold as candlelight. And she used it? She did. Why?" Andrei didn't answer for a long while. Then finally he muttered, "Because he watched." "Who?" "The prince." Katrinel didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but from wondering. Who could look upon such a thing and not flinch? Some said the golden spear wasn't always golden. That it was iron once, black as sin, and had drunk so much blood that it changed hue, as if the metal had grown ashamed of what it was and tried to clothe itself in royal color. Others believed the gold was paint, applied daily, to cover the rust and gore. Still others whispered that it was not metal at all, but something older, bone or ivory, shaped in fire by those who no longer walked among men. But none of these tales explain what happened in Brashov. It was a bitter spring in 1459, and the town was boiling beneath its cobbled skin. Brashov, seat of Saxon pride, jewel of Transylvania, home to merchants who thought themselves kings. They refused to pay tribute. They sent envoys to Hungary, to Rome, even to the Sultan, seeking alliances against Vlad. In response, Vlad came not with an army, but with theater. He arrived in velvet and black fur, atop a white horse, as if coming to offer peace. His men set up no camp, lit no fires, made no demands. The townsfolk stood watching from behind thick gates, confused. Then, at dawn on the third day, the spear appeared. It had been erected in the center of the marketplace, where just a week before women had traded carrots and men cursed the weight of ale barrels. Now a merchant hung from it. A man named Otto Wunderman, known in the town for his fine leathers, his hatred of Wallachians, and his laughter that sounded like a drunk ox coughing. No one knew how he'd been taken. His shop had not been broken into. His locks were intact. But there he was, alive, at first, lips quivering as the townsfolk gathered. The spear gleamed in the morning light like a sunbeam turned cruel. A note was pinned to his chest with a wax seal. It read only, "Words carry weight. Let this one fly." By noon Otto was dead. By nightfall, 5 more spears had appeared across the outer villages, each with a man who had signed Brashov's letter of refusal. The town, quite literally, bled apologies. Vlad never raised his voice, never fired a single shot. He rode out on the 4th day, head held high, as the bells of Brashov tolled not for mass, but morning. The spear began to travel. That's what unsettled people most. It wasn't confined to one city, one court, one battlefield. It was a wanderer, like guilt. From the mountain monasteries of Kozia to the flatlands of Altenia, from boyar feasts to beggar camps, the golden spear appeared when judgment was needed, or when someone whispered the wrong name in the wrong ear. A letter preserved in a monastery near Wallachia contains a curious passage written by an anonymous monk. The spear is not a tool of state, nor justice, but memory. A curse made visible. It moves not by hands but by history. We cannot bury it, for it walks beside us. By now, the spear had taken on a life of its own. Not just an instrument, but a symbol. A threat. A presence. Walls were painted with crude images of it. Children carved it into tree bark when playing prince and rebel. Farmers left offerings of garlic and coins at crossroads, hoping the spear might pass over their hamlet without tasting blood. Vlad knew all this. He cultivated it like a vintner tends vines. Because fear was currency, and the golden spear was his mint. Yet not everyone trembled. A priest named Ioan, once a chorister in Constantinople, had returned to Wallachia to tend a crumbling church in Impalement. He was round, cheerful, half-blind, and utterly unimpressed by tyrants. One morning he received a guest. Vlad. He arrived unannounced, cloaked, alone, carrying a scroll and a small casket. "I have a question," he said, after lighting a candle at the altar. Ioan squinted. "Only one?" Vlad smiled faintly. "Perhaps two." They sat in the nave, wind moaning through the cracked windows. The candle flickered like a guilty thought. "I have this," Vlad said, placing the casket between them. Inside, a miniature replica of the golden spear. 6 inches long. Perfectly detailed. Cold to the touch. Ioan peered at it. "And this is a gift. Or a burden. I do not know any more." The priest crossed himself slowly. "You believe it to be cursed?" "I believe it remembers." Ioan didn't laugh. He placed the lid back gently. "And do you want it to forget?" Vlad looked away. "No. But I want to understand what it remembers of me." That night, the church caught fire. No bodies were found. Only ash. And in the ash, the miniature spear, untouched. Back in Targovist, Ileana, remember her, the woman above the forge, was dying. A slow rot in her lungs. She coughed blood into rags and waited. Not for a doctor. For the spear. She had once held Vlad's gaze. Once offered him a cup of wine in the palace courtyard when no servant dared to. He had taken it, nodded, and said, "You are not afraid." "I am," she had replied. "Just not of you." He had smiled. "Then you are a fool." "I've been called worse." Now, decades later, she woke one morning and found it. Outside her window. Planted in the earth like a monument. No body. No guard. Just the golden spear, humming softly in the morning breeze. She stared at it for hours. And then, calmly, lay back and died. The spear disappeared that night. Some said it moved on. Others claimed it was never there. But the earth bore a hollow where it had stood. By 1460, the spear had become myth and menace in equal measure. Chroniclers struggled to separate truth from theater. Even the Ottoman envoys, hardened by the blood-soaked politics of their own courts, refused to travel without blindfolds when summoned to Wallachia. They preferred not to see it. To imagine it might only be a story. But stories have teeth. And gold, when sharpened, cuts just as well as iron. The golden spear had no shadow. Or at least, that's what people began to whisper. They said when it stood in the earth, rigid, gleaming, silent, it absorbed light rather than cast it. As though the sun, too, feared what it had become. And in a land where the dead outnumbered the living by memory alone, such small details mattered. A shadowless weapon. A curse too beautiful to be called a tool. By 1461, the spear was no longer just Vlad's symbol, it had become his echo. His second voice. His still tongue. In the border town of Târnu, which crouched like a dog beside the Danube, a tax collector named Gavril once said the spear didn't kill, it accused. He said it while drunk, among fellow clerks, one stormy night when the wind snapped shutters and the air stank of river fish. The next morning, Gavril was gone. But not just gone, erased. His ledger had vanished. His rooms swept bare. His name scratched out in the town's census with a line so deep it tore through the parchment. No one mentioned him again. No one asked? Only a single spear mark was burned into the wooden beam above the tavern door where he had spoken. People learned quickly. Elsewhere, in the capital, the prince's court grew stranger. It was never a place of joy, Wallachian courts seldom were, but under Vlad, it thickened like old soup. Nobles moved with caution. Servants whispered behind sleeves. No one touched the throne when he wasn't seated. No one sat without invitation. The golden spear, though rarely seen inside the palace, was always near. Some claimed they heard it being polished behind doors. Others said Vlad kept it at the foot of his bed, like a dog of judgment. A foreign visitor, Lord Matthias of Moldavia, once joked, lightly, foolishly, that he'd like to borrow the golden lance for a day's sport. Vlad only laughed slowly. The next day, the hunting dogs wouldn't go near the Moldavian lord. They snarled and pissed themselves. Two bit through their own leashes. Matthias left without a farewell. But the story most remember from this year, the one that spread faster than plague and lingered longer than a ghost, was the case of the Boyar wedding. It was summer. The hills were green with arrogance, the wine fat with spring sweetness, and a young noble named Constantine Valian dared to defy the prince's code. He hosted a wedding feast for his daughter without asking permission. He invited Hungarians, Turks, even a Saxon scribe. There were jesters and viols and dancers. And worst of all, he paid for it with money that had been meant for Vlad's army. Vlad did not send soldiers. He sent an invitation. It arrived on parchment made of lambskin, stamped in blood-colored wax, sealed with a sigil none had seen before, an impaled crown. The letter read, "You forgot to invite the host. Allow me to attend belatedly." They say the laughter stopped as soon as the letter was opened. The music faltered, never resumed. The guests stayed, out of fear rather than festivity. And then, 2 nights later, he arrived. No retinue. No horses. Just Vlad, cloaked in midnight velvet, and 3 silent men bearing a large canvas-wrapped object. He entered the great hall, where garlands still hung limp above tables of spoiled fruit. The groom, terrified but too proud to run, stood beside his bride, who gripped his arm like a drowning woman clutching a root. Vlad said nothing. He merely walked to the center of the room. The canvas was pulled away. The golden spear stood there, already gleaming, already wet. No one knew how. But there was no body, yet. Then Vlad turned to the groom. Not the boyar. Not the father. The groom. "You are innocent," he said. "But you inherit guilt." And then, to the horror of every gathered eye, he impaled the wedding roast. A pig, perfectly cooked, stuffed with apples and spices, was lifted and driven onto the golden spear. The meat split and hissed, fat dripping like tears down the shining shaft. The hall smelled of death and feast. Everyone wept. Vlad then sat down and carved a slice for himself. He ate in silence. And left. No one married in Wallachia for the rest of the year. The golden spear was not always violent. Sometimes it was a message. A warning. A punctuation mark to end a whisper. One day it appeared outside a monastery with no body on it, just a scroll tied beneath the tip. The monks unwrapped it slowly, dreading the contents. Inside, a single sentence. "What of you eats more than you pray?" Nothing else. That evening, the abbot confessed to stealing bread and hoarding wine. He fled into the hills. No one chased him. The spear disappeared at dusk. Even the Ottomans had begun to take note. Murmurs reached Sultan Mehmed's ears, of spears with names, of weapons that judged, of a Wallachian prince who wielded fear more artfully than any blade. And when Vlad impaled 1,000 prisoners along the banks of the Danube and left them to rot in columns visible from across the water, Mehmed didn't rage. He smiled. "Let the Christians fear him," he said. "It will make their betrayal slower." But not all in his court agreed. Some believed Vlad was no longer bound by politics or religion. That he served a different master now, one made of memory, retribution, and gold. One Ottoman spy, a man named Zahir, was sent to learn the truth. He disguised himself as a scribe and journeyed to Targovist under false papers. He recorded everything: movements, faces, rituals. He even saw the spear, once. He never made it back. But his journal did. It was found hanging from a tree in the Danube marshes, pages intact, written in a trembling hand. The last entry read: "The spear is not wielded. It chooses. It burns cold. I saw it flicker. It looked at me. And in that moment I remembered everything I had done wrong. It is not the prince we should fear. It is what he serves." That journal now sits in Topkapi Palace, under lock and guarded glass. No scholar touches it for long. And still, the people lived. They sowed barley, mended shoes, carved saints into crumbling wood. Children played games of Vlad and the Thieves, with broomsticks and screams. Lovers met under the moon, wondering if love could survive empire. Life did not stop. It never does. But it grew smaller, narrower, like a room with too many statues watching. And then came the Black Night. Nobody saw who died. Only that by morning, there were 13 spears along the trade road north of Bucharest. Each bore a man, slumped like a puppet in shame. They were priests. 13 priests. From 13 towns. All of them had signed a letter accusing Vlad of sacrilege. The letter never reached Hungary. But Vlad received it. The next day, no churches opened. The bells rang backward. And the birds, for once, did not come. By the time autumn returned, the golden spear had vanished again. Some believed it was buried. Others thought it was kept in a crypt, only brought out under moonlight. But a man named Radu, a crippled woodsman who drank too much and spoke too plainly, swore he saw it in a dream. "A forest of stakes," he said, "but only one was gold. It was taller than the others. And it hummed like a prayer spoken backward. And beneath it, the prince was crying." They laughed at him. Until Radu vanished. His house was found burned. His axe snapped. And in the ashes, a single feather. Golden. As if plucked from a bird too perfect to exist. And so the story twists on. The spear. The man. The land. All bleeding into one another. Wallachia had become not a place, but a lesson. And Vlad? He was no longer prince. He was memory made flesh. He ruled not from a throne, but from fear. And fear, as the people had learned, casts no shadow. Just like the golden spear. In the deepest months of winter, when snow pressed against rooftops like a muffling hand and icicles hung from eaves like nature's quiet teeth, Wallachia slept uneasily. Fires were kept burning not for warmth, but for reassurance. Not against the cold, but against memory. And under the breath of every hearth, the stories still stirred. The golden spear had not been seen for nearly half a year, and that was the worst omen of all. For when the spear was visible, the people knew where the prince's wrath rested. But when it vanished, there was only dread. It was during this uneasy silence that words spread of a book. Not a legend. Not a letter. A book. Hand-bound in leather said to be cured from the hide of a traitor, inked with something too dark to call ink. They called it Carti Fararagas, the book without respite. Supposedly kept in a locked vault beneath Poenary Castle, it was said to contain every name the spear had ever passed through. Each name written in a different hand. Each name dated. Each name followed by a phrase written in red. No one agreed on what the red phrases meant. Some claimed they were prayers. Others said they were confessions. But a scribe from Sibiu who had once handled the outer folios, briefly, before being reassigned to kitchen duty, had whispered that the phrases weren't in any language he recognized. Not Latin. Not Church Slavonic. Not Turkish or Greek. They read like thoughts. He muttered once in a tavern, already drunk. Thoughts no man should write down. A month later, he threw himself from the monastery bell tower. They found no note. Only a scrap of parchment tucked inside his robe. A single phrase. The spear remembers. Meanwhile, in Hungary, the wheels of politics turned slowly and with greased fingers. King Matthias Corvinus, ever cautious, ever watching, had grown weary of Vlad's flamboyant cruelty. Not because he cared for the impaled or the disappeared, but because whispers of the golden spear had begun reaching German courts. And foreign investors did not like rumors of enchanted justice. Matthias sent a letter. Diplomatic, measured, coiled like a viper in velvet. He requested Vlad attend a summit. A meeting. A show of fraternity between two Christian lords. Vlad responded with a gift, a single golden feather and a note. What watches me cannot be summoned. But I will come. And so will it. Matthias laughed. Then he stopped. Because the next morning, one of his heralds was found on the gates of Buda, folded in half, no wound, no mark, except for a faint golden sheen on his lips. Back in Wallachia, a strange figure had begun appearing at the edges of towns. A woman in a tattered red cloak. No horse. No shoes. Pale as ash. Some said she was mad. Others said she was a ghost. She never spoke unless spoken to, and even then only in riddles. She called herself Alina. Children followed her, laughing nervously. Adults gave her bread, hoping to earn her silence. One day, a boy asked her, "Is the spear real?" She knelt and whispered, "Would you like it to be?" The boy fled. But a week later, his father, an outspoken critic of Vlad, was found in the woods near Kurdia de Argesh. His body was unmarked. No signs of violence. But beside him stood the golden spear. Alone. Upright. Humming. Alina was never seen again. There was one man, however, who sought the spear. Not out of madness. Not from vengeance. From faith. His name was Theodor Chaubenou, a monk once banished from the Moldavian court for heresy. He believed the spear was divine. A relic. Proof that heaven had not abandoned the earth but had simply found new tools. He traveled Wallachia barefoot, wrapped in chains of penance, preaching sermons in crossroads and stables. He called the spear the angel's judgment. It punishes the liar, the thief, the coward, the traitor, he cried. It is not cruelty, it is the hand of the Lord made bright. Some villagers welcomed him. Others shunned him. And in one town, Dragonesti, he was attacked. A group of desperate men, hungry and hollowed by fear, beat him with clubs, spitting curses that he had invited damnation. He crawled for miles, ribs broken, eyes bleeding. And then, in the middle of a frozen field, he saw it. The golden spear. Planted before him, tall as sky. He crawled to it and kissed the base. He was found days later, frozen to the shaft, smiling. His lips gold-flecked. Among the boyars, dissent festered. Vlad's enemies had grown cautious, but not extinct. In secret halls and distant villas, they plotted. They spoke of overthrows, of assassins, of poisons and bribes. But always, someone would whisper, "What if it knows?" For the fear wasn't of Vlad. It was of the reaction. No one dared ask, where was the spear kept? Did it sleep? Did it feed? Could it be destroyed? Only one boyar, a crippled old man named Vasile of Giurgiu, dared voice his skepticism. At a private feast, behind thick curtains, he declared, "There is no spear. There is only a man who knows how to hide nails and silk." 3 days later, his estate was found in flames. Of his body, nothing remained. But his dog, the old hound who had never left his side, was discovered at the estate's edge. Impaled. And the spear, gold. Clean. By now, Vlad had aged. Not old, but thinned. With streaks of gray along his temples and a deepening stillness in his eyes. He no longer joined the hunts. He no longer presided over executions. He merely walked. Quietly. Often alone. But always near him, the hum. His servants claimed they didn't hear it. But one, a mute stable hand named Nikolai, did. He began scrawling strange diagrams on the barn walls. Circles. Lines. Spirals. Always with a spear at the center. One morning, he was gone. The barn was ash. The drawings survived. Carved into stone. When priests came to erase them, the stone cracked. They left it alone after that. And then, one night, Vlad disappeared. No fanfare. No farewell. No trail. He rode into the mountains alone. Some say he sought the cave from which the spear had first come. Others believe he was summoned by something beneath the earth, or above it. Poenary Castle stood empty for days. And then, the spear returned. Planted in the throne room. No guard saw it arrive. No servant claimed to have touched it. But there it stood. Point down. No body. No blood. Only a crown, Vlad's crown, resting on the tip. Tilted slightly. As if bowing. And on the wall behind it, freshly carved. I have watched long enough. The spear remained there for 7 days. Then it was gone. As was the crown. As was the prince. In the years that followed, the story faded, but not completely. Peasants still left offerings at crossroads. Priests still crossed themselves twice when passing forests. Children still played their games, though fewer dared play the spear. And every now and then, on certain nights, a golden shimmer would be seen atop distant hills. No sound. No figure. Just the light. And always, the sense that something was remembering. Watching. Choosing. Waiting. It is said that legends die with the generation that fears them most. But some legends, they shift, they molt, they bury themselves in the cracks of language and ritual, resurfacing when the soil of history softens. The golden spear did not die with Vlad. For death is an ending, and endings are mercy. The golden spear, what it was, what it became, had no interest in mercy. After Vlad vanished into the folds of the mountains, power in Wallachia was juggled by hands less steady. Regents. Cousins. Hungarian lackeys. Ottoman-backed puppets. But none could command fear like Vlad did, and none dared mention the spear, at least, not in public. And yet it never truly left. In the winter of 1470, a group of Polish monks, journeying through the passes near Figurash, came across a glade filled with animal bones, arranged neatly in rings. At the center, a stake of gold gleamed in the snow, driven into a pile of broken iron manacles. It was warm to the touch. They never spoke of it. But they wrote a hymn that year, never sung before or since, called Canticum de Lancia Aurea, the Song of the Golden Lance. It contained no lyrics. Just a single, repeated tone. Like a hum. What, then, was the spear? A tool of tyranny? A gift from darker gods? A parable wrapped in metal? Or perhaps it was merely a mirror. For fear, like gold, is forged. It is shaped in fire. And it shines brightest when it reflects the face of the one who wields it. And those who saw the golden spear, truly saw it, were never the same. They either went mad or silent. Or they vanished like breath into cold air. But the chronicles continued. A century later, a manuscript emerged from a cellar in Sibiu, bound in blue-dyed goat hide. It was unsigned, unillustrated, and anonymous. But it told, in obsessive detail, the lives of 23 men and women who had, at various times, tried to find the spear after Vlad's disappearance. Of those 23, 9 died of apparent suicide. 4 disappeared without a trace. 2 converted to heretical cults and were burned by the church. 1 reportedly spoke with tongues of gold, his voice physically altering, according to witnesses, as if sung by molten bells. And 1 lived to old age, blind and deaf, with his hands always clenched into fists, as though gripping something invisible. That manuscript was called Osanda Vi, the living damnation. It ended with a single sentence. You do not seek the spear. It seeks the part of you already impaled. Even the Ottomans, who had long dismissed Christian sorcery as peasant fear, began to question. In the court of Selim I, a map was drawn, charting alleged appearances of the Golden Shadow. The map is curious not for its accuracy, but for its movement. The spear did not circle Wallachia. It traveled outward. By 1520, rumors of a burnished spear of judgment surfaced in Serbia, then in Macedonia, then in the forests near Thessaly. A merchant caravan reported seeing it in the distance. A single gleaming pike, no one holding it, yet pointing always toward the sun. They turned back. All but one. That merchant was found months later, in Constantinople, blind, starved, and humming. His only words were, "The wound is wide enough for the world." And in Wallachia, time thickened. Forests reclaimed old villages. Spearwood trees, the black-barked ones said to grow from old graves, spread along old roads. By the mid-1600s, there were farmers who couldn't recall the name Teeps, but still left coins buried under new fences. Not because they knew why, but because their grandmothers had. Somewhere, high in the cliffs, Poenary Castle still stood, half collapsed, its walls bitten by lightning and moss. Yet no bird nested in its towers. No moss grew near the foundations. And in the deepest room, below even the chapel ruins, there remained an alcove. It contained nothing. Except a hollow. Shaped like a spear. Years passed. Empires rose. Lines on maps changed. Vlad became a myth, then a monster, then a misused name for stories far more romantic than real. Poets took him for metaphor. Horror novels made him a beast of fangs and shadows. But some remembered the spear. Because history does not forget what makes it tremble. In the early 1800s, a Romanian scholar named Ilie Basarab claimed to have found Vlad's tomb. He published a pamphlet. Gained attention. Even an audience with the Viennese intelligentsia. His body was found 2 weeks later. Face frozen in a silent scream. Chest unmarked. But both his hands were charred black. In his study, they found only one object overturned, an oil lamp shaped like a spearhead. It had melted, though the fire never touched the desk. And so the tale circles. Generation after generation. Because the golden spear was never a relic. It was never even truly a weapon. It was an idea. A judgment. A whisper that no cruelty goes unnoticed. And in a world so eager to bury its sins beneath new flags, new rulers, new names, the golden spear rises when the past is too loud to silence. You might wonder now if it still exists. If, somewhere in the dense arms of the Carpathians, a single point of metal waits in the soil. You might ask, is this real? But that is the wrong question. The right one is this. What would it remember of you? Would it pass you by? Or would it hum? Would it gleam in the dark, just for you, a little brighter? Because stories do not fade. They sharpen. They watch. And they wait. Wind down. Now the wind rolls gently through the hills of Wallachia, carrying with it only the rustle of leaves and the distant bleating of goats on misty slopes. The old stones of Poenary grow softer with time, their edges worn not by battle, but by centuries of rain and quiet forgetfulness. A traveler may pass beneath the towering pines and hear only the creak of the trees, the hush of streams, the sigh of a land long used to surviving its own memory. In the towns, laughter echoes again. Markets bloom with garlic, woven herbs, and sweet breads wrapped in twine. The children play new games, ones their grandparents don't understand, and the old stories are kept in books that gather dust beside family icons. But on certain nights, when the wind is too still, and the shadows pool a little too thickly near the crossroads, even the boldest traveler walks a little faster. Not because of what they see, but because of what they remember. Or rather, what remembers them. And somewhere, far from roads and time, in a place only the story knows, a single golden point glows softly in the dark. Still, silent, and eternal.